This week on Newsnight, death penalty reform campaigners press for changes amid a rise in the number of executions in Florida. Plus, a look at a lawsuit which offers details of a grand jury investigation into State Attorney Monique Warell. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. Last week, Governor DeSantis signed a death warrant, setting a date for the 12th scheduled execution in Florida this year. It extends the state's record-setting capital punishment streak, which has seen it lead the nation in the number of people put to death. But anti-death penalty campaigners say they're worried about the trend and recent laws in Florida that they fear could result in more people headed to death row. Newsnight's Crystal Knowles talks with an attorney who represents clients facing the death penalty.
Cases has been dropped,
going through the legal system can take years, even decades, even when the courts get it wrong.
Like I couldn't wrap my mind around him. I had represented this man for almost 10 years, and here he is in my car.
Since 2006, Maria De Liberato has been doing post-conviction work.
This is his first Thanksgiving.
It was that same year. Her client, Clemente Aguirre Jarquin, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death.
Clemente Aguirre, who is one of Florida's exonerees, spent 14 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. He had a jury vote of 7-5 and 9-3. So we have seen that. Another problem with the non-unanimous juries is you get people on death row for crimes they didn't commit. But Florida has that disturbing trend of having 30 death row exonerations, with more to come.
According to the Death Penalty Information Center, more death row inmates are exonerated in Florida than in any other state. Aguirre was exonerated and released in 2018. Before that, his time was running out. For years, a majority on a jury was enough to sentence someone to death. But in 2016, the courts ruled it must be unanimous. Then, in 2023, not long after the sentencing of Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz to life without parole, Florida eliminated the requirement for a unanimous jury in death penalty cases. Now, only an 8-4 majority is required.
You shouldn't have it to where if you're already convicted and you did the crime, whether to apply capital, one juror should not be able to veto that. And I don't think justice was served in that case. If you're going to have capital, you have to administer it to the worst of the worst crimes.
Governor DeSantis has signed the most execution orders in 1 year in Florida's history. Florida has already executed more people since 2023 than any other state.
He was making a presidential run at that point in 2023. So we had sort of Parkland verdict, his priority to be tough on crime, and the 8-4 legislation. So all of that happened in January of 2023.
De Liberato says had Aguirre not been exonerated in 2018, he would likely face execution soon.
When I got his case, he was in the post-conviction process. So he'd already been affirmed on direct appeal. He was in state court. He would be eligible about now, probably sooner. So he would absolutely have been, he probably would have been swept up in this particular execution spree.
Crystal Knowles reporting. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. And joining us in the studio this week, Christopher Heath from WKMG News 6. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Nick Papantone is coming back to the program, WFTV Channel 9. Good to see you, Nick, as always.
Happy to be here.
It's been a minute, so glad to have you here on the program. Marcial Labour from Spectrum News 13 as well. Good to see you, Marcial. I'm excited about my panel, three of my favourites on the program today. Marcial, let me start with you. Governor DeSantis on Friday signed a death warrant for the state's 12th execution of the year. The state's 10th execution of the year, in fact, was just this week on Tuesday. What do we know about the case that the governor just signed the death warrant for?
Yes, we know that this case, it's regarding 63-year-old David Pittman. We know that back in May of 1990, he was going through a divorce, and he traveled to Polk County, where he fatally stabbed the parents of his then wife and also the little sister, then set the house on fire. So he was convicted of triple murder and arson. So this will be happening on September 17th. This is the 12th execution
this year.
That's
what it's scheduled for.
Yes.
Yeah, are there concerns, though, over the transparency behind the governor's decision-making when it comes to executions?
I mean, the death penalty is such a controversial issue, right? And it's because, and for good reason, right? It is final. there's no going back, and we have a history in this country of, especially in the past, of people who did not commit the crime, either being on death row and getting rescued from that, or being executed. And so when we have these executions going on one after the other, there are concerns from some, especially death penalty opponents, that maybe not enough is being put in, and maybe there needs to be more of that discussion happening.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the attorney in Crystal's piece just now draw a link between the ramp up in executions and Governor DeSantis's presidential bid in 2023. I mean, what do you make of that argument that there's politics at play here, and does the White House have anything to do with this?
Well, absolutely. Now, there's a DOJ memorandum of understanding that came down from Pam Bondi's office on down, and it basically said not only are we going to be aggressive about the federal side, the federal executions, which were largely put on pause for several years, but we're also going to be aggressive about backing up states. And one of the areas where they've said they want to pursue is novel litigation, so to speak. And this is pushing the envelope and really trying to get some test cases in front of the Supreme Court. In 2008, the Supreme Court held that the death penalty could only be used for murder. Basically, you take somebody's life, you can be put to death. Well, what if you want to use the death penalty for somebody who molested a bunch of children? Didn't kill them, but molested them. Horrible crime, but can you use the death penalty for that? The Supreme Court has said no, but it was a 5-4 decision, and among the dissent was Roberts, Alito, and Clarence Thomas, 3 justices currently on the bench. So the DOJ and states would love to get another test case up to the Supreme Court, which would expand the scope of the death penalty.
Well, Florida's trying to do that, right? I mean, they've tried to expand the scope of the death penalty in recent legislation. That's just one of the recent legislative efforts that they've undertaken to try to expand its use.
There's been a number of them, right? So number one, child molesters. Number two, the fact that it doesn't have to be unanimous, which is a precedent that the Supreme Court has set time and time again. Florida has gone back and said no. We've had a couple of cases now go through, and the concern every time we report these cases is, will we wind up with another trial because the courts have overturned what the state's trying to do again? But they are trying as best they can to push these cases through and get more executions.
And there's another thing out there too, a 1970s case out of North Carolina that got to the Supreme Court, and this was dealt with whether or not you could have a mandatory death penalty. In other words, the death penalty is always on the table, but it's up to the jury, it's up to the judge. It's not final until you actually get to the sentencing phase. But could you make it mandatory? And the court held in the 70s no, but this is another one of those things where you've seen some AGs across the country, and definitely coming from DOJ on down, they'd like to see another case get to the Supreme Court and maybe get that reversed.
Well, one person who's been outspoken on the issue of the death penalty is State Attorney Monique Warell. Warell, it's emerged, was subject to a recent grand jury probe into the alleged destruction of public records, although there have been no indictments to date. Details of that probe and allegations against Worrell and others come in a lawsuit filed earlier this month by a former chief investigator in the state attorney's office, which last year launched an investigation into alleged violations of public documents policies. Worrell says that investigation ramped up after her re-election, and she's described the accusations in the lawsuit as baseless and defamatory. Well, Nick's been across this story more than almost anyone, so here's a piece he filed recently on the state attorney's response.
What can you tell us about why you're here today?
I can't tell you why I'm here today.
7 months after Monique Warell walked into the Polk County Courthouse to face a grand jury, she walked into a press conference to declare her innocence.
Rather than accept the will of the people, they chose to waste taxpayer resources on a partisan witch hunt.
A lawsuit filed Wednesday by a former member of her executive team accused Worrell's staff from her first term of storing records on private Gmail accounts and deleting those records after Worrell was suspended. He also said Worrell ordered some records be thrown away. But the grand jury never indicted Worrell or any of her deputies.
There was no such direction that was ever given from me to anyone on my team.
Worrell said the investigation ramped up the morning after she won re-election, describing a last-ditch attempt by her predecessor, Andrew Bain, and his team to remain in power. We asked her if she would release the paper trail. She said she's asking permission from the court since grand jury proceedings are secret.
I ran on a platform of transparency, and it is always my intention to be transparent with the public.
Monique Warell there. Nick, you were among the first to report on that grand jury probe that apparently wrapped up in April, right? What have we learned about it from that Eric Edwards lawsuit?
I mean, what we understand from this probe is that they were looking into the retention of records, and particularly whether Worrell ordered the destruction of records. She also had one of her chief of staff retain certain records on a Gmail account, that when there was a change at the administration, Andrew Bain came in, that those records were deleted. She has adamantly said, and I think we said there, that that order never happened, that this was all above board, and she's calling this a political lawsuit. You know, this was an attempt, based on the timing of it coming out in January, right after she won re-election, to try and get her removed from office again, or at least set that stage up again.
Why is this happening in Polk County?
That is something that we still don't know. One of the theories out there is that it is away from her current district, so there's no conflicts of interest, but it's close enough, right across the line from Osceola County, where she does represent. But that is a question that we've continually asked. Why Polk County, and why did Bill Gladstone of the Fifth Circuit, which is Ocala-based, why was he asked to do it? And that was our clue when we actually got there that day in January. The first thing that we saw was him walking up, and it's like, you're not supposed to be here, so what are you doing here?
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about her response. You mentioned it a second ago, but I think that Monique Warell is holding a press conference as we speak here. We're recording this program on Thursday morning, by the way, so things can change by airtime. What are we hearing from her in terms of her response, and what is she seeking now?
So the response, the press conference is not related to this particular lawsuit. The response, again, from that lawsuit being that this was above board, nothing happened, no indictment. The press conference today is going to be talking about the backlog of non-arrest cases that they had. They had something like 12,000 to 11,000 cases, which was high. It's been historically high. They brought some statewide prosecutors in to help go through those cases, because she said we weren't going to take any more until we got through them. And they're going to announce a small reduction, something like 3,000 cases. They're also, they did an internal audit to figure out policies and structure and what can change. She's going to be announcing some of the findings of that audit and some changes that they're going to be making. I don't have the specifics on that yet. The last thing that she's going to be talking about, or she is talking about currently as we tape this, is the lack of funding that prosecutors get. They get about a $68,000 a year starting salary in line with police, but police get overtime and prosecutors don't. And when you put them up against the big law firms that'll pay well over six figures, it's hard to not only recruit prosecutors, it's hard to retain them once they actually get some courtroom experience.
Well, what's clear here is that Monique Warell is keeping a pretty high public profile, despite the eyes of the state trained on her. I mean, is there still a concern, do we think, amongst her and her team that removal is still a possibility? I mean, the governor's done it before.
Oh, 100%. The governor has shown a very quick trigger finger when it comes to removing elected officials. More so, let's be honest, if they have a D at the end of their name. He's already removed her once. I know when I attended a couple of the debates between her and Andrew Bain leading up to the election, and that was a question that got presented to both of them was, do you think you'll be removed if you get in again? And she kind of demurred on that. And the question got put to Bain, like, will you say no to going back to do her job if the governor removes her? It's still hanging over. It's the sword of Damocles for this office. He's already removed her once. He very well could remove her again. And his office is clearly focused on the Ninth Judicial Circuit. I know when we've covered this in the past, we've looked at her numbers. They're not entirely out of line of many of the other judicial circuits. But this is where the focus is for this governor, because there is a political nature to this.
Well, just remind us why, take us back to that time, just remind us why she was removed in the first place. What was the reasoning?
Yes, this was back in August 2023. The governor was claiming that she was being too lenient on cases, and she wasn't, per se, given the harshest penalties, especially to cases related to juvenile and drugs. So that was his argument at the time.
Things that the state law, he said, would require.
Would require, exactly.
Yeah. Dereliction of duty, I think, because he also removed the state attorney in Hillsborough County as well at that time. We talked earlier about the death penalty, Nick, and I mentioned that Monique Warell has been pretty outspoken on that and other criminal justice issues, including during her re-election campaign, I think. I mean, you talked with her last year. Does she seem to be sticking to her sort of progressive prosecutor positions despite that pressure she's getting from the state?
She did. She frames it in a way maybe is a little bit more politically palatable. She calls it smart justice instead of just going after everybody for the max, which is more paperwork, more time, more money. Now that we've seen her in office, it's been interesting because she's been rather quiet. She's held a couple of press conferences the last couple of weeks,
since her re-election.
Since her re-election, yeah. But back in her first term, they'd be putting out a press release every other day, it seemed like. Now we'll go weeks without hearing from her, and when we ask her office questions, we usually do get responses, but it's never from her directly.
Well, I guess we'll see how that pans out going forward. Be sure to join us on social media meanwhile. We're at WUCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us on X at NewsNight WUCF. Okay, finally tonight, we wanted to look at some local developments in the immigration issue since we last tackled it here on the programme. Orange County Commissioners earlier this month approved a new addendum to an agreement with the federal government, allowing local officers to transport immigration detainees to ICE-approved facilities. 2 commissioners opposed the move.
Mayor Demings signed the addendum under pressure after receiving a letter from the State Attorney General threatening commissioners with removal from office. That letter argued Florida law requires local governments to use, quote, best efforts to support the enforcement of federal immigration law, and that by previously declining to agree to the addendum, Orange County had adopted a sanctuary policy. County officials and commissioners have raised concerns about the jail's capacity to support ICE operations. Demings has accused the state of intimidation and warned of possible future legal challenges.
By signing the agreement, we avoided the immediate risk of having the governor appoint his minions to lead Orange County, and thereby we maintain the current duly elected Orange County Commission.
I'm not going to vote to ratify this, and this is why. I hear the situational awareness, and I heard you say the word, sticking point. And for me, my goodness, the sticking point is that I am an American citizen. I live in the United States of America. And never in my life have I witnessed that you can vote yes, you can vote no, you can vote abstain, but if you don't vote the way I tell you to vote, I'm going to remove you from office.
Kelly Samrat there at that Orange County Commission meeting. Marcel, you covered that meeting where they ratified that addendum. There were fairly passionate positions, as we've heard there. Does it seem like commissioners were voting reluctantly here?
When in a way, it was a very, as you mentioned, a high-stakes meeting and very passionate discussion among all the commissioners. Also, the mayor said that they were at risk of being removed from office, and that was kind of the fear that was looming over that discussion, and that's why it took a while for them to vote, especially after hearing a lot of public comment as well on this. We saw that Commissioner Wilson and Martinez Emrat voted against it, and it got very emotional at times because they wanted to make sure that they were doing the right thing, as they mentioned, but also in that fear of being removed from office.
What did we hear then in terms of the public comments? Because these sessions that I've watched before seem to be pretty one-sided in terms of who's showing up to make their opinions heard.
In this case, we saw over 60 people were speaking during public comment. It took over an hour, so a lot of people spoke during public comment. They wore shirts saying, asking the commissioners to stand with them, so they would stand with the commission and prevent that removal. But basically, a lot of stories, emotional stories. We heard from one person who said that they had a family member who had been detained by ICE and taken to Alligator Alcatraz in the Everglades. So it was quite emotional. But most of them seemed to want the commissioners to abstain from signing this addendum agreement, but finally they voted 5-2.
They have gone through that. WFTV's covered the story pretty extensively as well. Has Mayor Demings given an indication of what might happen going forward now that the amendment to the 287G agreement's been ratified?
I mean, he said that they'll transport if they have the staff, but he's also indicated that they are very short on staff over at the jail. I don't remember the exact number of positions that are open, but it is a significant number. And so his way of maybe getting around this issue is saying, yes, we signed the agreement, but since we don't have the staff, we're not going to be able to transport anybody.
And he has said that this hasn't happened yet.
Yes, I was going to add that. He said that as of right now, we had never had that request. And when it comes to even the request coming in, we can say if we don't have enough people because we're 25% short on staff at the jail level, we can say no. We can deny the request if it comes to it. But it hasn't happened just yet. And he says he doubts that it would happen. We'll see.
Yeah, good point. Well, what are you hearing over at News 6? I mean, could there be a legal challenge here, do we reckon?
The county has indicated there is one. I don't know how much of that is just trying to maybe calm the waters a little bit. You mentioned the people that were there, and a lot of residents were very vocal and very upset about the county doing this and seeming to acquiesce to the threat from the governor and the attorney general. So, tossing litigation out there may quiet that out a little bit. I don't know that they've got a whole lot to litigate here, because there is some litigation working its way through. Orange County doesn't quite fit into that same box that we're seeing out of South Florida. So I think it's just one of those things where let's say it and hope maybe this quiets it down a bit.
I mean, this is kind of where politics and the law collide, right? Because, the state is citing its sanctuary city law. I mean, does that seem to give the state pretty broad authority to force compliance from local governments?
Boy, this is a huge stolen base on the part of the state. What you do is you say this: listen, you don't have to sign the agreement, but if you don't, you're going to become a sanctuary city, which is illegal. So it's like, if you don't have to do this, but if you don't, this will happen, and then once that happens, now we can come in. And it's just, again, it's coercion from the state to get counties and cities to do what Tallahassee wants. And again, we get an election every 2 years. We send 160 of these people up to Tallahassee. We get a voice in this as well, but this is what Tallahassee wants. This is what our state government wants. It's in the law, and the counties now need to comply.
I want to talk about those being held on behalf of ICE in the Orange County Jail in a moment. But first, listen to this from the Orange County Corrections Chief, Luis Quinones.
Initially, an individual that was held for ICE was not on our website. We heard the public. We went to the county's attorney's office, spoke with them. Then we've made that change. So now any person that is being held for ICE, their information is now on the website, and any loved one could go ahead and see that.
Luis Quinones there. Nick, the chief there saying that there is more transparency now on behalf of the jail about who's being held there on behalf of ICE. You've done some reporting on these immigration detainees. What have you been finding?
What we found is that the vast majority of them do have some sort of local criminal charge. So it could be something as small as, running through a stop sign or a red light or something like that. That might be more on the traffic side, but it could also be, some sort of domestic violence or another crime that a lot of people will get caught up in. What we are seeing, though, in the last month or two is this growing number of arrests that are made that don't have that local charge. Nothing was done. I don't necessarily know why this is trending upward, if police are looking more for it, if there's getting some direction, or if a certain agency is bringing in, is making more of these arrests. But in the month of July, the last month that we have data for, the number of those doubled. So from 30-something to 70-something on an average per day. And these people are only held at the Orange County Jail for about 24 hours or so before they're moved on. So we know that these arrests are happening at a very fast rate. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the month of August, if that was just a blip, or if this becomes more of a trend where it starts to overtake those local charged people.
Yeah, this fight over ICE collaboration is far from the only conflict at the moment between local governments and the state right now. You've been covering this Doge audit story, which is another point of tension, I guess, between Orange County and other local governments in the state. That's underway currently. How are local leaders handling that ongoing process? You've been covering that.
Well, we first caught up with the mayor, Jerry Demings, at an actual groundbreaking in the park, and he called it mean-spirit politics. He said it was overly politicized. Everything we do, it's politicized. So, it kind of comes from like the state trying to see how they can get themselves into the county. But some of the commissioners said we had nothing to hide. The books are open. We just got everything together really quickly for them to come and take a look, and we have nothing to hide. We have the programs here, and they'll see that what we invest the most in is public safety in the county. So they can come and take a look. Yeah.
News 6 has been covering this a lot as well. What are you guys hearing?
Well, our anchor Matt Austin interviewed Blaise Ngolia the day before Doge showed up in Orange County, actually the day before, hours before, I should say. Yeah. The letter got sent to Orange County. And some of the questions he put to him were rather telling. He asked about, how are you choosing some of these? And, asking about the fact that they do tend to be all Democratic cities and Democratic counties. The one Republican county that got targeted is one where the commission largely was elected and they all ran not with the DeSantis endorsement. So. Yeah. Kind of put an asterisk on that one. But we asked about this, and his answer on this was fascinating, and it's up on our website. But we asked about, are you going to audit, maybe visit Florida? You remember Visit Florida, they paid $1 million to Pitbull for a music video entitled Sexy Beaches and Hotels. That's our money. Are you going to potentially audit them? And the answer was, well, we only have so many resources and this, that, and the other. So clearly DOJ is checking, where it wants to go and picking out where it wants to be. We'll wait and see what these look like. The other issue is what comes of enforcement. Are these just roadmaps for the legislature to perhaps pass new laws to crack down on cities and counties? Maybe. Yeah. My sense of this is it's all building towards this crescendo of eliminating property tax, and that's 2 or 3 steps down the line. This is just kind of the precursor.
And we're getting that indication, just to jump in real quick, and that some of the statements that are being made and what they're asking for is this: let's find evidence, let's find reasons to be able to say to the voters, this is why we need that property tax eliminated. Because remember, that's if the state's going to do that, it's going to have to go to a referendum.
Yes, that's right.
In front of the voters, where every single county and city is going to sit there and say, we need our fire department, we need our police department, we need our 911. And the state, it looks like, is trying to find the reasons to say, well, actually, you can fund that fire department because here's all this money that we've uncovered. Orange County, objectively, is one of the more transparent governments that we have. Is there waste in the government somewhere? Absolutely. I mean, that's what comes with such a large organization. You can find ways to save money. But it is one of the governments that gets covered the most in Central Florida.
No doubt.
We tend to be very well sourced in that government. And so other governments, other counties and cities get a lot less of the spotlight and attention. And so those are the areas that are still not being looked at compared to Orange, which is getting audited.
That's a good point. And it's also worth mentioning that property tax is liable to be an issue going forward, especially in the next legislative session moving into next year ahead of the election. There were some legal developments this week on alligator Alcatraz as well. We'll talk more about that on next week's program. In the meantime, you can find a link to the state statute on cooperation with federal immigration authorities on our website. It's all at WUCF.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Christopher Heath, Nick Papantonis, Marcia Leva. Thank you so much for coming in, guys. Really appreciate your time today. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WUCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.